final debate critique, and the last time that you'll probably see me with mismatched clothes. So, I thought this was a good debate. I'm going to go through each speech individually. So, Alexa, I think that you do a good job here, actually, of kind of laying out the structure of what the problem, you think the problem is, what the plan is, and then a bunch of other harms, right? So we have the kind of classic structure for the stock issues. But the relationship between these different aspects of the speech could have been improved. Because your inherency or what you're saying about the status quo is a little bit loose. It's that the status quo is not working. And you had this extremely rich series of examples. The Patton Boggs example, the Lucy Bickerson example, right? So you have all of this evidence that you present at the beginning of your speech talking about what is happening to interns through different kinds of reports, all this kind of stuff. But it's very variegated, right? It doesn't. But by just kind of listing all this evidence, it seems that all of the evidence kind of seems to boil down to the same thing, and it's hard to process it. What the difference is to the auditory audience, right? Hard to process all the kind of complexity of this. And you're asking if what you want the evidence to do is kind of show the variety of problems in the status quo, you need to give some commentary on how each of these distinct cases point to a different problem, or really if they all point to the same problem. We need to have like maybe a more robust sense of what that is. Because though you kind of say that the status quo is not working in protecting unpaid interns, then we end up having some of the debate about like whether or not that's true, which is fine. That you can't like prevent that in the first speech. But it's also not clear how the plan solves this particular problem. Right, and they do kind of get you on this later in the debate. How do we know that the problems of interns not getting proper training or interns being sexually harassed are solved by the plan? And actually, the harassment is where it's clearest because then we have employee protections. Even though this kind of gets muddled in the debate, and Oliver has a response to it, which might not have been was persuasive to the audience, even though I didn't find it particularly persuasive. But really, I think that what the real problem is with internships seems to be about the not getting proper training and about being forced to do work that is not justified under the criteria. And you need to show very directly how your plan solves this problem, even before you go into all of the other harms that your plan will solve. Okay, and then when we do go into the harms, like the first harm that you go into after presenting this is about the interns that are on the social media pages, and that this kind of puts the company's reputation at risk. And I think this is actually the best time we've seen someone make that move of why there's a potential liability for the companies in unpaid internships. But there's again an enthymeme here that that is paid internships will train employees better. And you say as much eventually in a cross-examination. But why? Why is this the case? And you kind of just assume it. And I think that you need some argumentation to back this up. What would be a reason that a company would train a paid employee, and why would they not? That kind of trades off with why they don't train unpaid employees. And I think that maybe one of the reasons is that at the point that you don't invest anything in someone, not even time for training, they just kind of become an available resource pool for menial tasks in the company. And part of the problem that then becomes the liability for the company is things that the company thinks are menial tasks and really aren't, are given to unpaid interns like social media sites, and then this kind of blows up the company's face. But I think that there's like, even before we get there, a bigger problem, which is why do paid internships solve the problem of the lack of training in internships? Not fleshed out, needs some argumentation in order, and I think that with some more argumentation that you may have really persuaded the judges that you won this debate with more argumentation on that point. Okay. There's some shouting outside right now, so I'm kind of interested in going to see what it is, but I'm going to finish this critique. Okay, so in cross-examination, you're asked about this, that paid employees are protected because they can go to court, they can have hearings, and they get the specific things that they need for harassment. And then Oliver asks you and says, can they still bring up criminal charges? And you say, I think so. And I think that this is the problem, again, maybe where more research on like what the specifics about harassment and how sexual harassment operates in companies would have been useful for you. Because you kind of concede this point to him, and therefore it kind of like takes out one of the major harms that your plan solves. And maybe it doesn't take it out, but it kind of weakens it, because they're like, okay, that there's still some protections here, even though I think if you had more about the nature of sexual harassment in law, you could have responded and said, no, actually, they don't have that kind of protection. Okay. And then you kind of get this question that are unpaid internships valuable? And this question about, are they better than nothing? And I think that this is kind of a place where the affirmative really needs to have a clear position, which is no, that maybe either no, the unpaid internships are not better than nothing. They're unpaid work. So not working and not being paid is better than working and not being paid, right? And I think that that's a position that few affirmative teams were able to really articulate strongly, because I think we lacked kind of a principled defense of labor in the affirmative, and it kind of came down more to the external benefits of having an unpaid or a paid internship between the two sides. And I think that we really having kind of a sense of like, what is the nature of labor, and how do internships function here? What should be the role of government? What would a good government do? How does a good government think about internships? Might be a way that we pose this question. And then a good government potentially or imaginably could say no. One internship is not better than nothing. It's better to be paid for your work or to not work. There you go. Okay, so Oliver. So I think you do a good job coming out of the gate here. Though, I mean, it would be nice to still have an introduction that looks more like an introduction. But I think it's nice that you come out of the gate with something strong, which is they want to, what's the kind of metric for the debate? And you're saying that you just have to prove that unpaid internships have more benefits than harm. And this is effective, I think, in this debate. But I think it's also maybe a weak overall strategy. Because really what the negative needs to prove is about the plan, not about, in general, unpaid internships. And in some ways, it makes sense because they're getting rid of unpaid internships. And you might say, because the plan gets rid of unpaid internships, we want to kind of defend a principle that says we shouldn't eliminate something that has benefits. And that's kind of our principle of good law, that if something has benefits, and that outweigh the harms, we shouldn't eliminate it under the law, right? Even just saying that kind of attaches it back to the plan. But partly what the thing that you put forward here takes you away from the plan. And you kind of get away with this a little bit because the affirmative doesn't give another standard that points back to their plan and points back to the difference between the status quo and the world under the plan. And you kind of just brush these together and you're like, really, we're just talking about the value of unpaid internships. But we're not, really. We're talking about which world is better, the status quo or the world under the plan. Unpaid internships feature in that, in a very important way, but it's not the same thing, logically or otherwise. If it is the same thing, you need to tell us why. Okay. I think there's something interesting here in your store owner example. So, because this is going again back to the question about what kind of defense you should make. So you say a store owner, we shouldn't ban stores because one person can't protect themselves. This is, I think, a strong kind of formulation of a principle that there is a certain way in which government's responsibility is not towards every individual's protection, but towards a kind of general protection of a freedom to do something. And if you choose to be a store owner, then therefore you have some kind of responsibility for protection that's on yourself. I think what's really dangerous here is that this is tied to sexual harassment, this argument, if I remember it correctly. Because in cross-examination, you do get some questions, which I'm kind of surprised weren't taken further, which is that do start to sound a lot like victim blaming. That someone had the opportunity to not be in a place, then they shouldn't be in a place. if that place could potentially be put them at risk for sexual harassment, especially since it's not clear why any place couldn't be a potential site for sexual harassment, and therefore it seems like you would be responsible for going nowhere if you were. This kind of seems to me like one of the implications of this argument as applied to especially female interns in places of work. Like, these are all potential sites of sexual harassment. So this seems kind of like a dangerous principle applied to sexual harassment to me. Dangerous in terms of argumentation and in a not unrelated way. Also dangerous in terms of like the implications that this has for how we understand where you are in relationship to 50% of the population. But on the other hand, I think it's an interesting principle to think about government policy, right? And I think that you can say, in relationship to like back pay and all those issues, that it's another kind of place where, yeah, there are certainly going to be some internships that don't follow the protocols, but the protocols are in place, and therefore we're not going to take away the possibility for unpaid internships just because there are violations of them. And the store owner example is kind of nice because it figures that I think it's nice. Yeah, that's all I'll say about it. So I think that that's good, but I think you misplace where to use that image in this debate. Okay. So, yeah. When you start comparing unpaid internships to acid and prostitution, this is also just in bad taste. But it's something that, obviously it's kind of in jest. But, it may... so on the one side, we have kind of the affirmative saying, aren't there kind of distinctions between things that we ban? And like we would want some things, we might think about banning some things, or like lifting bans on some things, and other things we wouldn't want to unleash the whole class of drugs, right? That we would want to kind of keep distinctions. I think that that's pretty reasonable. Yeah, though I'm kind of surprised acid is the drug that you would want to keep banned. I feel like there might be more obvious examples, because your audience might not be that familiar with acid actually, or it just doesn't. It's to me not the most intuitive kind of example. But I kind of see the point. So I think that it's unclear though why the affirmative is asking this, since you're offering a ban, kind of effectively, on unpaid internships by saying the minimum wage. So it's kind of unclear about what's happening in that cross-examination. Yeah, which is not a very helpful thing to say, but I was confused. Okay, so in the second affirmative, this is Sarah. You reread the plan, you begin by rereading the plan. We don't need to hear the plan again, right? We know what the plan is. Even though you have a strong plan, right, and I think that's part of the reason you want to read it again, it's well worded. We don't need to hear it again. And then the second thing that you say is really strong, and this is like a nice principle. The internships are not the same as a volunteer. They're a temporary position that has an emphasis on job training. This is like effectively a definition of internships. But what I want to hear after that is like why internships are important to protect, but also why that importance means that they should be paid. And I think that kind of principled defense doesn't really come out, because we then kind of have a general, I think, Sarah, you kind of slip into a general critique of all internships. You even say at one point, interns are the housewives of the corporate world, which is like a brilliant piece of rhetoric, though kind of like stinging and like uncomfortable in some of its implications. But I also think that you kind of indict your own plan a little bit here, because this seems to also apply to paid interns, and we really need to have a kind of view of the world under the plan that distinguishes why paid internships are not this way. And I think one of the things that's implicit in the housewife example, even though it's kind of is that generally women are not paid for their work in the household, and that this is kind of assumed to be okay. So maybe like opening that image up a little bit more may have kind of shown kind of what your principle was really standing for, which is that when we assume in an economy that certain kinds of labor don't require payment, what we end up with is just kind of structural inequality or something like that. and that here we're seeing it again as kind of a gendered thing, since most unpaid internships are female, are taken by females. So I think that might have been, there might have been more there, but it was kind of just like put out there in a way that could have actually worked against you in indicting paid internships without developing it more fully. Also, I think brilliant is the stuff about experience inflation. I think that I really hoped that this would be like the principled defense. And I was kind of waiting for an argument like this for all of the debates, which is, as there's kind of like, yeah, experience inflation. That's a great way of putting it, that you feel like you need more and more internships, and this puts everyone, all of the workers, all of the college students at a disadvantage, and gives the companies kind of free rein to be like, extend their practices to be like, really, you need to work, you need to have 2 internships and all of these kinds of things. So it just kind of works. It's a great kind of system of inequality. And the plan, what we need to hear more about is how the plan stops experience inflation. And I think it does, like it does to me clearly, right? Which is, if corporations or nonprofits or the government have to pay interns, then they can't continue keep asking for more and more and more internships from hires, because they're going to want to offer fewer, right? And that this kind of like puts a stop to experience inflation. You would have to develop that argument more, but I think that could be like a really, really strong kind of argument for the plan if developed more fully. But it's kind of, again, not attached to the plan. It's kind of free floating as a critique of internships in general, and we don't have the distinction between paid and unpaid internships. So I think for both of the affirmative speakers, you guys have all of the right arguments. Like, you have really cool, brand new stuff. But what you don't do is attach it to the plan, and it gets kind of lost in the debate in an unfortunate way. Yeah. Okay, so then, so Courtney, you kind of repeat a summary of Oliver's speech in the beginning, and then you go on to talk about how the Labor Bureau, your Labor Bureau stuff that, I know you did the research on this, you really want to get this argument in again. I don't get it. I don't think that the number of inspectors is benefiting you on the negative side either. Like, I'm not sure what the number of inspectors thing is getting you. I don't understand. So I think that here you're attached. Like, Musashi talks about, I think he talks about at one point, you shouldn't have a favorite sword, like your favorite weapon, because this means that you'll try to use it in an inappropriate moment, and that this will be the moment when someone kills you. So the thing that as you're doing your research and you find the argument that you like the best, this is the thing you should be most wary of. Don't have a favorite weapon. Okay. But you do a nice kind of like recrystallization of the argument against inherency, where you're like, this problem is being solved in the status quo. There's the class action lawsuits. There's the anonymous state and federal state agencies that are producing back pay. And so I think that it's like even more kind of condensed than in Oliver's speech, and this is good. However, and this is maybe more to the affirmative side, actually, class action lawsuits come with a catch a little bit. Like, once the class action is pursued, it's over, right? You can't reopen an action for that class, if I understand it correctly. So like, solving policy with a class action lawsuit is very problematic if the temporality of the thing that you're solving continues to go on afterwards. Because once you open a kind of class action, it means that we can't do it again. Do you see what I'm saying? You're not here, so I hope that you understand what I'm saying. So that's a potential weakness in kind of the solution of a class action to a problem that doesn't seem to have an end to it, right? It's different if it's like there's a defect in a particular piece of hardware or a consumer product, right? Because like the company will then withdraw it from the market, and in order to like not have an even that there's a kind of end to the thing that has caused the liability. Whereas here, it's such a widespread kind of thing, like anyone who's potentially had an unpaid internship. And we don't think that it's going to stop happening, right? And so it's like the class of people who have abused unpaid internships, there can be more people that come into that after the class action is closed. And then this like creates this legal problem of like, how do we deal with that then afterwards? Which would be very complicated, and maybe like a reason why we should have a policy measure and not rely on the court system, if that makes sense. And then you kind of have, you like signal an argument about why it's better to go with the states than with the federal government, which is like a classic policy debate thing. There's like even a name for that argument, but that's not important. But I wonder why we don't have a reason why the state is better than the federal, except that there's a principle that we shouldn't pass law unless if there's already something kind of happening. But I don't really have a strong reason why. And I think that they really take you down on this in Cross-Ex. They're like, so 3 out of 50. They're like, don't you think it would be better to just like do the federal action? And yeah, you don't really have. I don't think you really have an answer to this. I mean, you're saying that it's a rapid governmental action, but fine. It's even more rapid to pass the federal action. So you need to have a kind of response for this. You know, you might want to say, look, all we're saying is the problem isn't unsolvable in the status quo, and there are some benefits to unpaid internships, right? So like the point is not that we shouldn't take federal action, but that like the problems are being solved in the status quo with unpaid internships, and the benefits outweigh. The benefits of unpaid internships are important enough that we wouldn't want to get rid of them. Something like that might have been a more useful way to go for you in that last debate. Okay, so rebuttal speeches. Courtney, you get back up, and you start right away with, I think, the most important part of the inherency argument. Under the plan, it is still not possible to completely enforce this policy. It's full of the same problems of regulating internships. It would be nice to kind of have an illustration of what were those problems, because one thing that will be regulated is that they are paid appropriately, because their hours are going to be logged in a different way, we would assume. Yes, but maybe not, and since it's not been talked about in the debate, you could talk about that. But the problems of like, are they getting job training? Are they being asked to do menial tasks? These kinds of things don't really seem to be solved by the plan, and I think that you want to kind of focus the judge in on those images of really why the plan doesn't work to solve the problems that they want it to, and give some argumentation as to why it doesn't solve those problems, even if it seems obvious why. Okay, one thing I'll say is that you don't want to. I mean, it's past the point where we're probably ever going to do a debate again, but you said this is just a continuation of my last speech. That shows that you're not in the form, right? Where you want to where you're just kind of like, oh, I just got interrupted by a cross-examination. Let me continue. No, you want to be like, listen. You want to like make the form that your audience is attending to the form that you inhabit. And so there is a kind of general kind of truth to this. If someone's like, hey, let me ask you a question while you were giving a speech, and now really what you want to do is kind of continue what you're saying. You're like, that's a great question, and then you answer the question, right? You don't want to say like, well, really what I was saying answered your question. If you had really listened to me, this distances you from your audience. So you want to inhabit the form that your audience gives to you or that your audience assumes as much as you can, rather than trying to like be like, really there's, what I want is a continuation between these two things. That's a little nitpicky, but I don't think it's, I think it's important. Okay, so finally Alexa. So you say that there's no strong evidence to back up the other ways of protection. I think that that's good that you say this about the sexual harassment arguments that they're making. But I think that you kind of balance it. You say, we have some evidence, they have no evidence. So I think this is nice. We have like the weighing of the things. Like they provide no reason. But what they have provided, and which does kind of constitute evidence in the rhetorical sense, is the idea that you can charge someone with assault. And it's like a commonsensical kind of evidence. It's a rhetorical kind of evidence that they don't develop very well. But I think that you want to kind of attune yourself to what the audience may think is evident in the arguments. Because if an argument is evident, it constitutes evidence. Even if it doesn't have support of an expert, even if it doesn't have statistical support, it counts as evidence for the audience. So that's a kind of difficult thing to do, because I agree with you. They don't really have evidence. I think that Oliver was wrong in his argument. I don't know if I've told anyone this, but my dad sells sexual harassment training videos, so that's partly why I maybe am focused in on this a lot. So I've had to take a lot of sexual harassment training courses, and I know that this is false. But it is still evident to the audience in a way, and you need to kind of attune yourself to that. Okay, and then you also say that why is the paid internship important? And this is, I think, crucial for you to kind of take away the debate. What you say is that it like gives it a more of a professional feel, and the employer is able to write a recommendation. This is I think that why it's kind of why maybe the audience is persuaded at the end to go with the negative, or your judges are, because if that's the only reason that it's important, it's not clear why the boss of an unpaid internship can't write you a recommendation. To me, and I'm not really sure why it gives you more of a professional feel that you're paid. I don't really know. So, and I'm not sure that it's that important that we need to take like federal action that potentially do eliminate all of these other internships. So I think that really what the kind of debate ended up hinging on was whether the affirmative was able to prove the significance of a paid internship as distinct from a critique of all internships. Because on the negative, someone could have run a counterplan that was like, we should just get rid of all internships, right? And some of your argumentation in this debate would have been useful to that. But you are really advocating for a kind of internship. And so you have to do more of that work to say, this is why internships are valuable and why it's necessary that they are paid. And we don't really know. We don't have too much of that in the debate that's articulated clearly enough for your audience. I thought this was a good debate, and I'm sad that it's the last one. Take care, everyone.